you would speak to us, you'd help us to understand what the word that was read would be legible, not only in language, but more importantly in our heart. We pray, God, that you would cause us to be obedient, even more so, that our hearts would turn into true worshipers in the sight of the glory of who you are. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you. In Jesus' name we pray. So first and foremost, I want to welcome you and say Merry Christmas. It is great to see you all. And there are not too many opportunities where I get to see the entire body come together in my context. So I'm so happy to see you all this day. Before we get into God's Word, I would like to ask you one question. If we were to get together and have lunch one day, hopefully there will be these days when we can be able to have those moments. If we were to have lunch in this Christmas season, I were to ask you, what is the true meaning of Christmas? What would your response be? And what would you say to me? My thing is, or what I would consider is, or what I would think is that for many of you in this room today, you already have this idea of this obvious truth that Christmas is not about, it's not about commercialism, it's not about materialism, but I think you already know that Christmas is about Jesus. Even more so, you know that this day is very specific towards the day that Jesus Christ was born. This is why we see in bumper stickers in cars, you will see people saying, it's the reason for the season. You already know this. As Christian parents, one of the things that Christian parents try to do their best, and I think that many of you guys have already done this, is that at some point in their life, when children are very young to the age of where they are today, you are trying to do your best to impart the most possible, best knowledge of Christmas to them. You're doing your best to tell your kids what Christmas is all about. And I'm almost certain that you've already done this very, very well. And why do we do this? We do this because the world tells us something that is different. What does the world tell us of what Christmas is all about? A couple weeks ago, I asked my 2-year-old, Jubilee, I said, Jubilee, sit down with Appa. I said, Jubilee, what's Christmas? And she took my hand and ran to the Christmas tree. She pointed to the tree and said, Appa, Christmas tree? Presents. Christmas. At that moment, I was like, man, I was so proud. My 2-year-old can talk really well. But then all of a sudden, I was like, wait a second, I'm a pastor. I should be teaching better, right? So she said, I said, oh my goodness, I'm screwing up. Maybe I should quit being a pastor. No, we know that she's only a 2-year-old. But here's the thing. I love presents. I love Christmas cards. I love Christmas trees. I think you all do too. But as a parent, like my hope and my wife's hope is that when we teach our children of what Christmas is all about, one day we say to them, this is Jude, what's Christmas? We're hoping that they will come and say, Papa, duh, it's Jesus' birthday, right? And I think many of you guys have done this very, very well. But I'm hoping that I will be able to disciple my children better to a point where progressively these kids will not just think about Jesus' birthday, but rather they would go even beyond that. That we would all go beyond just the mindset that it's all about Jesus' birthday. I'm hoping that all of us will be able to mature more to the point where when you think about Christmas, when you come to Christmas Sunday worship, when you come to Christmas Day worship and we sing together, be it preaching or leading worship or participating or you're praying or you're leading the choir, when worship is over and you go back into your car and you start listening to that final Christmas carol, when you finally get to your home and you prepare your Christmas dinner with your family, when Christmas dinner is over and you unwrap presents, when you see family members opening the gifts and you see their eyes delighting, when you see all these things, I'm praying that we would all mature even further to the point where we realize that Christmas is not just about Jesus' birthday, but it's beyond that. It's much more. And that's where I want to lead us today. Now, what is the significance of all these kind of actions? What is the significance? Well, we know that the significance isn't just about Jesus' birthday, but it's about the day that God came from heaven to us. That's what Christmas is really all about. The day that God came to us. Ultimately, that's what I want my kids to know. This is what I want all of us to know. That we would all be able to articulate that God came to you and to me, and when He did this, this changes everything. It changes all of our minds and our hearts. When you look at all the little stories about the very first Christmas, you'll realize throughout the Gospels that there are many, many little stories that are happening through all of it. But today, what I would like to do, or would like to suggest for us to consider, is consider or think about how we can pay attention to the people in the story who are, let's consider what these people are saying throughout this Christmas story. What are they saying? Right? More specifically, what people are saying that cause people to worship. That's what I want us to consider. Here's the reality. When you start reading this Christmas story, or this Christmas story, what are people doing? They're worshiping. They're worshiping God with all their heart. Through their experience, they are worshiping. When truth is revealed to them, when it hits them like a brick about what Christmas is all about, they automatically stop and they sing, they worship with all of our hearts. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 1, you'd see Anna's song. You'll see Mary's song. You'll see Zechariah's song. And what are these people doing? They're bursting with joy. And they are worshiping. So this is what's blowing their minds. That it's not just about someone who is coming, who's going to have many, many birthdays, but rather these people are realizing that God was going to visit His people. God was going to visit His people. And for these people, they understood in their mindset the true significance of this. What they understood was that God was a God who kept His promises. That's what the gospel tells us. That God was a God who keeps His promises. Now, check this out. The very first Christmas was for them to be reminded that God was coming and God was showing His favor and showing His promise. And one of the best ways for us to see that this was happening was to go all the way to Genesis chapter 3. In Genesis chapter 3, God is speaking to Satan. Right? What is Satan done? Satan had deceived Adam and Eve. They had sinned. In consequence, we have all been fallen, and then we are all led to death. And it is at this moment where God says to Satan, Satan, you did this. You did this, but let me tell you, one day, a man will come from the seed of a woman. Now, who is this woman? We all know that eventually it will be Mary, the mother of Jesus. And so God continues and says to Satan, He said, Satan, you will bruise this man's heel. But, Satan, let me tell you, this man, he will crush your head. And so, for the very first Christmas, for them was to be a reminder that God was a God who keeps His promises. The very first Christmas was for them a promise that God had made with Abraham, that he would be the father of many nations. Christmas was for them proof that God had not forgotten His people. This is very, very significant because at this time, in their context, God had not spoken to God's people for 400 years. For 400 years, generation after generation, people wondered if God had forgotten them. But here, right now, at the very first Christmas, their minds are being blown away because God was about to speak. God was about to speak to His people. And when they knew that He would spoke, what would happen? God would come. He would dwell on His people, and He would visit them. And when he visited them, everything changed. Life changes. The world changes. The universe changes. Now, this is what theologians call the incarnation. The incarnation, we sang about this today in a couple of our songs. We know that the incarnation is a deity, God, who is fully God, but is also fully human. Right? This is why Jesus is called Emmanuel, God with us. Now, I can't spend a lot of time on this, but what I would like for us to consider is what it says in Luke chapter 1, verse 67 to verse 79. It tells us the story about this Jewish priest. His name is Zechariah, and he has a son named John who ends up becoming John the Baptist. And I think you already know the story well. But to give you a little bit of context, you have to remember that for 400 years, God had not communicated with his people. But all of a sudden, after 400 years, this angel comes and he speaks to Zechariah. And Zechariah is frightened. He's terrified. But what is it that the angel says? The angel tells Zechariah that this Messiah, the one that has been chosen, the one who had been prophesied throughout the Old Testament, he said that he would come through his cousin and through his own son, John. He would use that person to prepare the way. We've talked about this a little bit throughout the Advent season. Now, when Zechariah heard all these things, what did he do? How did he respond? In his heart, he said, "Yeah, right. Yeah, right." But God, he hears, he understands. What does God do? God shuts his mouth. And Zechariah cannot speak. He cannot speak. Now, as time progresses, Zechariah starts to realize that things are starting to go. This first Christmas thing is happening quicker and quicker and quicker. And when he repents and he starts to understand what's happening, God opens his eyes. And what is it that Zechariah does? He sings. He lifts his voice and sings with all his heart. And what is it that he sang? He sang about God's promises. He sang about the marvel that God's promises were coming true. He is amazed. What else does he sing about? He sings about his son, John, that through John, he will be preparing the way for the Messiah to come, for God to be with us. But the main thing that was happening in Zechariah's heart, that was changing things in him, that caused his heart to worship, is what it says in verse 78 and 79. Zechariah said this: "Because of the tender mercies of God, here whereby the sunrise shall visit us from on high, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace." Do you see the significance here? It isn't just about this pending birthday, but what Zechariah is singing about and portraying about is he's saying that there is a truth that God is coming to visit his people and that God keeps his promises. He keeps his promises. And he's saying that the salvation is coming. It's on its way. It's an exciting time for him. Now, I want you to take that thought and put it aside just for a minute. Remember this, okay? What I want to do is I want to lead us into what it says in the main text that was read. Take a look at what it says in the Gospel of John, the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 1. And I want you to look at how John describes his very first Christmas. When we look at this, you realize this is very, very different. If you look at the other Gospels, look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they describe Jesus as a baby. But in this text, John chooses to show the very first Christmas through something that's happening in eternity past, something that is far, far away. And why does he talk about this? Why does he bring this up? The reason he does this is because he's laying a foundation of this Christmas story so that we can understand the incarnation, God with us. Hear what it says. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." What an amazing way to start this story. Mysterious, unique, causing you to say, what is going on? Now let me help us to, let's kind of unpack what John is saying. Because when you start to understand the depth of what he's saying, then you start to realize, oh, this is amazing. Who is the Word? You know that it's Jesus. The Greek tells us that it's Logos. He is saying that in the beginning was Logos. But in the beginning, the better question that we should be asking is, when was the beginning? When was the beginning? We find our answer through what it says in the very first verse. He uses the word was 3 times. In Greek, they use this unique word. It's called the imperfect tense. And I know this is not very important for you, but I want to impress on you the importance of this. When they start to understand this imperfect tense, what he is saying here, or what he is suggesting is that there is a continuous, eternal action that is happening in the Bible. John is basically saying that there never was a beginning. He's saying that there was never an end. He's saying that Jesus was in the beginning from eternity past. Okay? What John is saying here is that Jesus was always been there, always existent. But here is something that is even more exciting. In the beginning was that forever Logos, and this Logos was with God, Theos, God himself. The forever Logos, Jesus was with Theos, was with God forever and ever and ever. He was always with him. But here's the moment where the mic drops and blows your mind. John says that the Word was God. John says that Jesus was God. Jesus was always been forever God. And that's what John wants all of us to understand. You take that moment and you scroll down all the way to verse 14. And the Word says this: the Word, Logos, the eternal forever God that was always with God, was always with God for eternity past. He comes up and he says that this God became flesh. He became one of us. He became one of us. If you want to have a very, very awesome QT, a quiet time that just blows your mind, take that and you think about it for a little while. Give you a headache. Yeah? God became flesh. There is no other place in the Bible where God does something like this. God stepped into human history. He entered into human time. And he became flesh just like one of us. And what? He dwelt among us. And we saw his glory. If you were a Jewish person and you were to read this text, what would you say? You would say, heresy, ridiculous, preposterous. How could you say something like this? But this is exactly what John is saying in today's text. This is exactly what John is writing for the very first Christmas. And so I want you to take a moment and take on the gravity of what is happening here. Right? If you're not thinking about this, it'll just go by like this. Let me take a moment and think about the gravity of what's happening. The eternal God who created the universe took shape within that matter. This God who created the sun, the moon, and the stars, the Elohim, this supreme power, this Yahweh that could order armies and empires around like a pawn in a chessboard, stepped into time, into Palestine, as a baby. A baby who could not do one thing for himself. He couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep properly, he couldn't control his bowel movements. This baby was completely dependent on this teenage girl. Amazing. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And dwelt among us. Now, take that moment and think about this. If you're writing any notes, this is probably the most significant thing that I want you to understand today. If you take a moment and consider what dwelt means, in the Greek it means tabernacled. Contextually speaking, what they're using this word as a place of worship. And that's kind of a crude way of saying it. But if you were to take these notes and you consider what this means, what John is basically saying here is that God came to us and he dwelt among us, but he tabernacled with us. He tabernacled with us. He worshipped with us. He was in our presence. Now, what does this mean? What does this really mean? Well, before Jesus came to this world, how did God hang out with his people? How did God spend time with his people? God hung out, he dwelled with them in a tabernacle in the temple. This temple, or in the temple was this tabernacle, and this was the holiest of holies. This is the place where no one can touch. This was a place where you couldn't just get inside and say, "Hi God, how are you? I'd love to talk." It's not a place where you can come in and say, "Hey, can I come and see him today?" This wasn't a place where you can come in and say, "Hi God." You can't just come in and say, "Can I touch you?" You cannot do this. If you remember your Sunday school stories, you can't do this. There is no particular way. It was not possible. If you remember this, you have to remember that there's only one person who could get close to that area. This was a priest. That priest would do what? He would make sure that he was clean, make sure that he was sinless as possible, or he was as clean as possible, and then he would come in. And if he had sin in him, he'd just die. But this is the gravity of what is happening here. And this is exactly what Zechariah probably understood, right? No one can come to God. But consider the significance of what is happening in the very first Christmas. The Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. The God that we weren't allowed to be near moved from there to a neighborhood of where we were at, and we were able to see him with our own eyes. We were able to speak to him with our own voice. We were able to touch him. Amazing. We can touch God. We have to be able to realize that to be able to touch God, the eternal Logos, that he was with us, that we could touch him, amazing. Not only did we touch Jesus, but Jesus touches us. Over 30 years later, after Jesus' ministry is near the end, he takes his own hands and he spreads it wide on the cross, and his blood is shed, and the eternal Logos dies for our sins. And 3 days later, he comes back to life so that this eternal Logos, who had become flesh and dwelt among us, now might live in here, in all of our hearts. And now we behold his glory. Now the truth and the power of this truth can be better illustrated if you can consider what it is like for the Jews in Israel today. I don't know if you've ever been to Israel. I've never been there, but I've read a lot about it and seen many pictures, heard many, many stories. But if you go to Israel, there's this one area, there's this wall. It's called the Wailing Wall. And if you go and you see this wall, there are many, many Jews who come to this wall. And they put their hands on it, they put their foreheads in it, and they cry out, they sing, and they worship, and they pray. This Wailing Wall is where the Jews would refer to as a part of the temple, the original temple. When they look at this temple, they realize that God is on the other side. God is on the other side. Literally, these people truly believed that God was there. The other side, that's what they're thinking, that's what they're feeling. Because if you look at history, the Muslims came, they took that area. So on the other side, there's the Muslims, they can't go anywhere else. But here's the thing that you need to understand. As much as they wanted to be near the presence of God, all they could do was lean on that wall and pray and say, God, God. They would worship with all their hearts. They would weep, they'd pray, they'd worship. But they understood that there was just a wall. They could not get near him at all. It was not possible. I have a lot of friends who have been to Israel, and they tell me they see all these Jews crying out to God. But for Christians, for pastors, people who know the gospel, what do they want to do? These pastors, they want to go and say, man, I want to preach. I want to tell you what you need to know. And what is it that they want to tell them? They say, guys, God's not there. What are you doing? He's not there anymore. But for Christians, we understood that God did not just stay in that wall on that other side, but Jesus came from heaven to earth, and he dwelled among us. And now he's not there, but he's in our hearts. He's with us today. And now, because he is in us, we glorify him. We behold his glory. God is not there. He's right here, guys. He's right here. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14 to verse 16 says this. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens. And he's talking about the incarnation here. Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our own weakness, but one who has in every respect have been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then, with confidence, draw near to him, to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in times of need. Jesus Christ is with us. Did you know that every religion in this world, what it's all about is for you to go and find God? That's what these religions are all about. But on this Christmas day, on this Christmas story, in this gospel, the gospel story tells us that God came to us. He came to us. It's Christmas. While it is true that Christmas is about Jesus' birthday, it's so much more, is it not? It's much more truth. That God came to you and to me, and he proved for once and for all that his promises were true. He would always be with us. Friends, as you have heard the story, as you remember what the story is all about, what the gospel is telling us, as you leave this room, remember what this is all about. That when you get in your car and you start singing the songs, when you go and have your turkey dinner, or whatever you want to have, in your heart, in your mind, may you remember that Jesus Christ came and he dwelt among you, and now he is in you. May this cause your heart to worship with all your heart. May each Christmas mean so much more, knowing that Jesus Christ is now in you. Friends, come and worship. Sing. Repent. Experience. Hear. God is at work and he is here today. Let's pray. Father, as we come and enter into a time of worship, as we prepare to hear and sing and listen to the things that you have done for us, God, may we not be marveled by just the pure melodies of what we hear today, but rather we are taking this time to hear what you have done, what the story is telling us today. God, fill our hearts with the awareness and understanding of the magnitude of you coming to us. That is what changes our hearts today. And so, God, I pray for our church that we would be able to hear this message in a way that changes every single person's heart, in a way that life has changed completely, that it's no longer just one day where we eat well and have a great time, but rather it changes our life each day. Jesus Christ, we thank you that you've obediently and faithfully came down from heaven to earth, obedient to the Father, so that you would come as one of us. The most humiliating thing that we can consider, but in doing so, you did this so that your Heavenly Father would be glorified and that we would come to know you once again. So God, move our hearts. Cause us to be repentant. Help us to be a people who have a desire to worship and to know that you have done the most remarkable thing that we could ever consider. That you came to find us.